أهلا وسهلا بكم إلى مقابلة خاصة من العربية. مقابلة خاصة نجريها اليوم مع وزير الخزانة الأمريكي تيموثي جايتنر في أول زيارة له إلى المنطقة العربية بعد توليه وزارة الخزانة في الإدارة الأمريكية الجديدة. Mr. Secretary, thank you very much for this interview. We appreciate it.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Let's start by the purpose of this visit, especially to Jeddah and Abu Dhabi.
I'm here to underscore the President's commitment, as he outlined in his speech in Egypt, to strengthen our ties with the region, not just with Abu Dhabi and the Emirates, but with the Gulf as a whole and with the Islamic community of the world. That's the purpose of my trip. But we have a great interest on the security front and the economic front, long history of cooperation, and I'm here to underscore the importance of that to the United States.
We want to focus a little bit more on the financial issues. I'm pretty sure there are so many topics that came up with your conversations to the authorities, especially in Saudi and Abu Dhabi. Oil is the most important thing, of course, for this part of the world. Did you have any discussions on oil, and what is your administration's view on the current oil prices?
Well, we discussed oil as we always do in these kind of conversations, and I don't want to talk about and comment specifically on current prices, but let me just underscore two things. I think we all have an interest today in trying to make sure that we're reinforcing these tentative signs of recovery we're seeing across the world economy. I think it's very important to the region, it's very important to the United States, to countries around the world. We need to make sure we pull the world economy out of this crisis, put it on a path to sustainable growth. It's also very important to us, as you heard us announce in the United States last week, and you saw at the G8 too, that we explore ways to bring greater transparency to energy and commodity markets, and see if we have ways to reduce volatility in those markets. I think that would be in the interest of all of us.
I mean, that must be a little bit worrying too. Did you hear any concerns from the authorities in Saudi and in Abu Dhabi about those, if you're going to put any limitations on speculation in oil?
No, actually, to the contrary. I think we share a common approach in this stuff, and common interest in exploring ways to, again, I said, bring more transparency, and to the extent we can, try to reduce volatility in these markets.
You mentioned several times that you are more towards stability in oil prices. You prefer stability in oil prices. How do you think that can be achieved? I mean, did you have any requests from the authorities of the Gulf?
No specific requests, again, beyond underscoring our interests. And as I said, I think there's a common appreciation of the importance of doing what we all can to try to, again, reinforce the broad strategy to pull the world economy back out of this very acute crisis. And I think there's a strong shared appreciation of that imperative here and around the world.
Let's move on to the reaction to the crisis. Of course, the U.S. administration's reaction was very strong. The governments of the region here also took many steps to help their economies and the banking sector. Do you think that what they've done so far is enough, or do you think that they need to do more?
I agree with the way you phrased it. I think what distinguishes the world's response to this crisis from so many crises in the past is that the world really did come together and move relatively quickly on a broadly coordinated forceful response to the force of the recession. I think that's been effective in weakening the force of the storm, and I think it's really to the credit of the strength of policy, not just here, but in China, in the United States, countries around the world.
But in the Gulf, do you think more needs to be done?
Well, that's a judgment your government will have to make, governments will have to make. I think that what we try to underscore, and I think everybody's in the same place, is that want to keep watching very closely, be very aware of the risks and challenges ahead, and try to make sure we don't avoid the mistakes that have been made in past crises, which is to put on the policy brakes too early. We want to make sure we're providing carefully designed but forceful, sustained response.
I will have to get back to that when I ask you a little bit later about the U.S. economy. But since we're talking about the region, the economies of the region kept on growing even though there was recession in the developed economies. How do you view the economies of the Gulf right now?
Well, I think here, like in so many parts of the world, we're still going through and still facing a challenging period of adjustment. We came into this crisis at different periods. The U.S. came in earlier than many other countries. The process of adjustment started later in the other major economies and even in parts of this region. And so it's sort of understandable, given the different challenges we face, that we'll come out of this at a different pace. I think the really important thing is I think we're making progress. And in the U.S., I think the strength of the policy response put in place by the administration, working with the Congress, has been very effective in helping arrest the decline in GDP growth, bring more stability to the financial sector, start to lay the foundation for recovery. But of course, the important thing is that we keep at it.
Since you've reached Saudi Arabia yesterday, all what we've been seeing on the wires is a talk about giving or talking about to the officials here about the budget deficit, because the economies of the region, especially the Gulf, they have the surpluses, and most of it is in US Treasury bills. So did they have any concerns about the size of the budget deficit?
You know, I found here, but it was not surprising to me, I found an really quite substantial confidence in the broad strategy of this administration in trying to address the causes of this crisis and put us on a foundation to a sustainable recovery. Of course, we are committed to making sure that as we emerge from this crisis, once we're confident that we've repaired the damage, we are committed to bringing our budget deficit down to a sustainable level, to addressing the principal causes, like in healthcare costs, of the long-term fiscal problems we face in the United States. But to do that, we need to bring growth back, and we need to put in place some important reforms. And again, as I said, I wasn't surprised by that. I found substantial confidence here in the strategy we've adopted, and I think that confidence is justified.
There wasn't the questions of when. I mean, you talk about bringing back the budget deficit into sustainable levels. What about when will that be? When will you be able to do that?
Well, again, the most important thing we face together now is to bring growth back. That is a necessary condition for all our efforts to bring fiscal sustainability back in place. That's true for countries around the world. And it's necessary for us to do that, because if we're unsuccessful in doing that and making that commitment convincing, then the risk is we'll have a weaker recovery. We want to avoid that. So we are committed to making sure, once we're confident that we're out of this storm, to beginning that process.
If we look at the foreign reserves of the Saudi Arabian Monetary Authority, they have gone down from a peak of $443 billion in November 2008. In May, they reached $395 billion. Now, we don't know how much of that is in U.S. Treasuries, but according to what they say, a big chunk of it. Were you worried about that? Because they needed to decrease those foreign holdings in order to spend internally, because they have an expansionary budget. Did that cause you any worries? Did you discuss that with the Saudi authorities? No,
we didn't discuss that, and I'm not concerned about that. But without talking about the specific issues in Saudi Arabia and without addressing those numbers, again, what I would say is I think if you watch carefully what's happening in our markets, you're seeing something that's very important to the world, which is when the world is more concerned about risk, that what generally happens is people want to hold treasuries, and you see investments increase in the dollar-denominated assets. That's an important sign of basic confidence in the stability and depth and liquidity of our markets. And we take very seriously our responsibility for sustaining the kind of policies that can preserve that degree of confidence.
That's also something I want to ask you about, because I heard you reiterate several times in the past couple of days that you are committed to a strong dollar policy.
I'd be happy to say it again right now. It is the policy of the United States, and it will remain the policy of the United States, that we are committed to a strong dollar.
But the question is how? I mean, how will you be able to reach that?
Yeah. The most important foundations of that policy are to, again, make sure we are doing things that improve the basic flexibility and resilience of our economy, that we are doing things that preserve confidence in our capacity to bring our fiscal position back to a sustainable level, that we're moving aggressively and effectively to help stabilize our financial system, repair the damage done by this crisis, to make sure that our independent central bank is committed to, has the ability to keep prices stable over the longer term. Those are the most important things we can do.
Did you hear any concerns about, although we heard in the past few weeks from Chinese authorities, from the Russians also, that they should be looking